In every sport, there's usually one or a team of umpires or referees, depending on the sport, that is charged with making in-game decisions, and their decisions are final, deciding the eventual results of the game. These umpires are humans, and as we are all prone to errors, many mechanisms have been put in place to avoid mistakes. In baseball, instead of the original single umpire, a team of 3, then 4 umpires was put in place. It has also implemented the use of instant replays, which was incorporated in 2008. Despite all these interventions, there have still been several questionable calls in the game that can change the momentum of a team and thus change the game's trajectory. Several umpires have been blacklisted by fans, most notably Angel Hernandez. But also a glance into history brings into sight some names already listed in the Black Book for errors, such as the infamous Don Denkinger error in Game 5 of the 1985 World Series, Ken Herbeck pulling Ron Gant off first base and tagging him out in Game 2 of the 91 World Series, and Rich Garcia missing Jeff Mayer, a pitch invader who tipped the ball in favor of Derek Jeter in Game 1 of the American League Championship Series, among others who have made questionable calls in games that have gone on to have very notable consequences, with the team being favored going on to win the World Series. One begins to wonder what was done to these umpires, and what is in the cards for the umpires who make such questionable calls, considering they cannot be reversed and have to be accepted once the game is over. Every fan whose team has once been robbed by a wrong call will surely support a motion for the umpires to be suspended, maybe even indefinitely. But then, who is above mistakes? Soon the games will be without umpires. Becoming an umpire is not as easy as simply understanding the rules of the game. It takes a lot of dedication and hard work, as well as good and trained vision to detect everything that's going on the field. Umpires are not locked up in any form of camp or hostel throughout their careers. They live with the general public and live a pretty much normal life like every other person. Only notable difference is that their job is being an umpire. Just like any other job, a lot of training is done to become one, but it takes even harder work to become an MLB-level umpire. To become one, the individual must be certified and must have had about 5 to 10 years of experience in lower league officiating to be called up to the MLB. A lot of things are considered, such as accuracy of calls, composure under pressure, and other minor things such as punctuality, vocality, and so on. This only makes one wonder why there are still lots of errors in the MLB when they are so carefully selected. The umpires are also aided by the instant replay, which after much clamoring by fans, especially after errors such as in the Jeff Mayer incident, in which the umpire could easily have missed the touch and the call could have been rectified by the instant replay. This innovation, which was deemed long overdue since other sports such as hockey, football, and so on had long adopted it, brought a lot of improvement to the decisions of the umpires but did not fully clear out the errors. If anything, it has simply just increased the spectacle of their decisions, as there are less tenable excuses for errors in officiating. Recently, the Major League Baseball Umpires Association released a statement stating this: "Umpires are expected to be perfect from the start and to get better from there. Like players, our mistakes are subject to intense public scrutiny, and we are also held accountable by our employer in performance evaluations. Although we don't always know in real time if our calls are correct, we review them closely following the game and try to learn from any mistakes." This reveals that even the umpires themselves agree that the expectation is perfection, but the reality is quite far from it. The only questionable thing is if they are held accountable, or rather, how they are held accountable. No one needs to be told how much wrong calls can impact the game, because umpires have the final say on how the game goes, and baseball is a game of fine margins. In some high-scoring games, like basketball, a referee mistake can be recovered from before the game ends. But in baseball, in which most teams hardly have more than 5 runs a game, a wrong call is pivotal. Apart from the consequences of the individual call, wrong calls also go a long way in impacting the player's morale. A wrong call can ruin a player's confidence and lead to poor results. Talking about what happened in the 9th inning of the October 21st 4-2 Phillies win over the Padres in Game 3 of the NLCS, one could argue that the ejection of Profar by Todd Tichenor hugely affected the momentum of the game, maybe even causing their defeat. The aforementioned errors by Don Denkinger and Rich Garcia were also pivotal in determining who won the most prestigious prize in the competition. Fans who saw those games are probably still livid decades after the events. And those who lost their money betting? On the 3rd of May 2022, Chris Fairchild made the news for apologizing after blowing a call during the top of the 5th inning of a game between the Mets and Braves. And on a Monday night in August of the same year, home plate umpire Laz Diaz made an egregious mistake in the 9th inning, allowing a batter to walk on 3 balls. September 11th, the one everyone expects on this list, and one of the most infamous and controversial umpires in the history books, Angel Hernandez, made a wrong call. Most ironic thing is that it was not even his call to make, as he was about 400 feet away from where the action was when he made the call. Though some of these calls ended up being more consequential than others, everyone agrees that the game will be better without the errors altogether. To be fair, some controversial decisions are simply just due to strict compliance to some rules, which are generally ignored by other umpires, such that when an umpire decides to follow such rules, the fans think he's made an error. For instance, a controversial rule was enacted a short while ago which instructs that home plate should not be blocked without possession of the baseball. This has led to several on-field controversies, one of which occurred in the top of the 1st inning on Tuesday, 16th of August 2022 in Cleveland. Guardians catcher Austin Hedges caught a throw from shortstop Tyler Freeman as Javier Baez slid home. Baez was called out, but a video review overturned the call, indicating the catcher did not give the runner a lane. The Tigers scored 3 runs in the inning, going on to beat the first-place Guardians 4-3. Fans and players protested this call, and at the end of the game, Hedges claimed that it cost them the game. He also said that it's a play that's been called a few times in recent times that has never been called before. He went on to protest the rule, calling it tricky to define. In situations like this, it's hard to blame the umpires, but it's also hard to make fans understand that they are simply following the rules, which may not be how they would prefer the game. Other times, the causes of umpire errors can be simply human. Human errors cannot be ignored, and no matter how much technology is incorporated into the game, the final decision is in the hands of the umpire. This is why there is a crew to help discuss, especially when the umpire's judgment might be wrong. Despite all these measures, one wonders why there are still errors in officiating. Errors that are just wrong and cannot be supported by any rules. Some fans may insist that some umpires are paid for their services before the games. Other times, some claim that the umpire supports one of the teams playing, or maybe a player in one of the teams playing, and this may affect their judgment. This is avoided as umpires are trained to not allow their emotional attachments to affect their in-game decisions. But how accurate can that be? Now that it is established that mistakes are bound to occur in officiating a baseball game, is there the risk of suspension? And if there is, when is suspension in the cards for offending umpires? Angel Hernandez, more popular than many players themselves, is one person who undoubtedly will be voted out of work, if possible, by fans, if they could. But despite his and his counterparts' repeated errors, he still tends to officiate at a high level. This can make one believe that there is hardly any risk for suspension for poor officiating. Ron Kulpa is another name that flies around for controversial officiating, but following the 2019 brawl with the Astros coach Alex Cintron, where he claimed he could do anything he wanted on the field as the umpire, there were many calls for him to be suspended. But what was done about it? Several other incidences also warrant actions by the association, but seemingly nothing is done, especially to the knowledge of the fans, unlike in other sports like soccer and football, where there have been notable suspensions that make headlines. A quick study of the games officiated by Angel Hernandez, though, makes one thing obvious. While there has been no direct suspension or obvious punishment given, he officiated in the World Series in the years 2002 and 2005, but not again since. And also, the caliber of games he's been privileged to officiate dropped for a while, before picking up after about a decade. In fact, in 2017, he filed an unsuccessful federal lawsuit against MLB, alleging that racial discrimination kept him from being promoted to crew chief and from umpiring World Series games. But this might be largely due to the controversy surrounding his credibility in officiating games. This reveals that while there may be other forms of punishment that are not made public served to offending umpires, possibly to uphold their credibility and respect in the public eye, the only obvious punishment is that offending umpires are not allowed to promote successfully or to officiate in higher levels than they currently are. So the chances that we'll stop seeing Angel Hernandez or Ron Culpa on our screens is very low. But one sure thing is that for as long as controversies circle their games, they will not officiate in higher-level games. And there is also a risk of demotion or a reduced level of operation for as long as it continues. In the future, an outright suspension may become a widespread punishment for offending umpires. But for now, it's not, as their punishments are in other ways, as earlier stated.